Hello, everyone, and good evening, and welcome back to yet another Game for Thought live stream right here at Hoest Hogeschool Campus for Digital Arts and Entertainment, a campus that we commonly call DIE. Welcome back. My name is Allie Weiss. I am our ethics coordinator in international game development right here at Hoest DIE, and I am thrilled to host tonight's session about sustainability in digital entertainment. Welcome all of you on Twitch, whether you are a student at DIE, whether you're a student at Hoest, if you're in Belgium, if you're abroad, if you're just a passerby on Twitch. Welcome. You are so welcome here tonight for our discussion. Welcome back if you have joined a previous Game for Thought stream before. If you have not, it's not a worry at all. I'll go ahead and I'll explain the premise of the stream. So here at Digital Arts and Entertainment, we are primarily a digital entertainment school. So we have game graphics production, game development, independent game production, interactive sound production. We have very technical subject matters that we deal with here at DIE. And with that being said, over the years, we've found it more and more crucial to integrate some kind of space to discuss these socially relevant, ethically relevant topics that are going on in the industry and that our students will inevitably be confronted with when they enter the industry. And so around 2 years ago now, we sat together and we decided that this Game for Thought live stream series, so a live stream every single month, every third Wednesday of the month, we would come together right here on Twitch and discuss a different topic per month, together with experts, industry professionals, students, and the like. So we are back for yet another stream. Tonight's topic will be sustainability in digital entertainment, and we hope to tackle it with both a focus on environmental sustainability, but also discussing well-being and personal sustainability and how those two really are innately intertwined. So, how is the stream going to work? So we will start out with a guest presentation tonight that will be done by the wonderful Paula Angela Escuadra. Paula is the senior UX strategist at Xbox. She's also the co-founder and co-chair of the International Game Developers Association Climate Special Interest Group. So Paula will be giving a guest presentation, dipping our toes into the world of sustainability, especially within the scope of digital entertainment. Then we'll take a short little break, really short, and then we'll be right back with a panel discussion in which you will be able to ask your own questions in the chat, and so you'll really be able to have your own voice be heard. So in the panel discussion, we of course will have Paula, again from Xbox. We'll also have Tim Wagendorp. Tim is the sustainability coordinator at the Flemish Audiovisueel Fonds, commonly called VAF. And we also have Xalavier Nelson Jr. Xalavier is the studio head at Scaffold, which is an independent production company in the US. So we have speakers from US this evening. We have speakers from Belgium. We are located right here in Kortrijk, Belgium. So we have a very international group this evening. If you have any questions during the stream, please ask them. Just make sure to put a capital Q before your question, pop it in the chat, and then we will be sure to get to that during the panel, during the general audience discussion. If you have any questions, pop them in the chat. We'll be sure to answer them. We have a lovely team of moderators on the helm tonight that can help to answer your questions. So, without further ado, thank you, as always, for joining. I'd love to pass it over to Paula to dip our toes into the world of sustainability, so then we can work with what we've heard and what we've learned within the panel discussion. Without further ado, I hand it over to Paula, joining us from the United States. Alrighty, and we are back. Hello, Paula, joining us from the United States of America, from Xbox. We are thrilled to have you here tonight. How are you doing?
Doing all right. Super excited to talk to you all about this major existential dread and what we can do about it.
Amazing. We love to hear it. All right, Paula, I will give you the microphone. Looking forward to it. You got it.
All right. Phenomenal. I will assume that it is changing. There it goes. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being willing to chat with us today. Quick background for me is that my name is Paula, she, her pronouns. I serve as the senior UX strategist for Xbox Cloud Gaming. I also serve as the sustainability workstream lead to make sure that our game development studios have like the best possible chance of success, not only in terms of delighting players, but finding more opportunities for us to give players options depending on the experiences that they want to have. I've been in the industry for 15 years, if you count GameStop retail, formerly in industry for 12 years. And I've been everywhere from starting indie social mobile gaming to nonprofit games and education to now AAA development and publishing. And so I've been in a lot of different places. I'm also neurodivergent, so you can tell that in my career. But my role, my volunteer work as the co-chair and co-founder of the International Game Developers Association Climate Special Interest Group, is a grassroots way we've been able to do this type of work. And it's been something that I'm excited to talk with you all more about, because not only has it kept me sane, but I found that in every single company I've ever worked for, it's been clear that games have this transformative potential to not only delight players, but change the way we're thinking about things. And so we'll talk more about that now. And so, as you may know, our reach as a gaming industry is pretty massive. We have over 3 billion players who have touched the game ecosystem and are actively playing and interacting with it. And it raises a lot of questions for how we can meet all the needs of those 3 billion players and counting, especially in a more connected era where everybody increasingly has access to multiple forms of technology. There's a lot of questions from a business and policy standpoint. And so when we think about the fact that our, earned revenue as a potential industry will be over $285 billion USD by 2027, like that's a lot of opportunity for us to delight players, make money. But it is also a valid concern that, the climate crisis is real. The way in which we're having to live and operate is changing already. While there may be articles and research indicating that purchasing behavior actually doesn't get as severely impacted by things like recessions and financial decision making in our big systems, it is still something that overall has an impact in how players decide to engage with us as an industry, how players decide to engage with each other, and the types of games that people are looking for. This is also something that the gaming industry is increasingly paying attention to. So the climate crisis persists regardless of human financial systems and purchase decision making. Some of the business cases that we've heard in talking about this in an industry that historically is always about more, and it's always about more graphic fidelity, more robust console, PC, mobile hardware, those things, like it's a significant shift. But overall, we are seeing that financial investment may be impacted in the future because more funders and funding institutions care a lot about climate mitigation risk because of where game developers are and how that impacts our ability to get a game to market. We also have to think about market expansion. So when we think about those 3 billion players all over the world, We can't reach them if their homes are on fire. We can't make games if our electricity grids don't work because of extreme weather events. And so our ability to actually meet those players and expand our market, so that, you know, we can pay our bills and keep making games, is something that's very top of mind. Player trust is also a major factor. New generations of players and developers are increasingly talking about how important it is that companies do more, that governments do more. And the way in which we meet those needs is playing an active role already, because newer audiences are more and more interested in games that align to like the social experiences that they want to have, the intrinsic motivations that they have, and the value, the systems of values and value statements that align with our identities, more so than like IP and brand and how big an IP is. And so that requires us to change the way we're thinking about our content. Lastly, this also has an active impact on our ability to bring in new game developers into our companies and our teams. Climate migration is very real. There are people in industrialized countries who have moved elsewhere because of chronic health risks, which for me in California, very top of mind because of wildfires. And so thinking about the way in which we find and retain the people we need to create new games and experiences is something that's really important. And so in terms of the low-hanging fruit, there are many and there are none, which I'll talk a little bit more about. But when we think about potential reach, when we think about the fact that more access to games inherently means more energy consumed, what can we do as game developers? First is we could potentially work to, you know, minimize our environmental impact, think about energy efficiency as we're thinking about game performance. We can also think about massive cultural impact, because games are inherently lenses for how we view the world. And so there could be opportunities for us to normalize pro-environmental mindsets, think about how to enable more interaction with potential solutions. But when we start to think about like, okay, what are all the potential solutions that I can have as a game developer? There are a lot. And the main thing that, one of the biggest things that impacts the climate movement, even in general, before we talk about, you know, our games that we're making and playing, it is very easy for us to get into fight, flight, or freeze mode because of the paralysis that comes with having too many options and not knowing where the right one is. And the climate crisis is not supported by us getting overwhelmed, us needing to then, like, you know, do what we can, focus in on the thing that is just going to give us that first, like, additional step forward in the day. It can be really jarring and overwhelming. And so the IGDA Climate SIG, for short, because the full name is too long, is meant to help take away some of that like crisis of existential dread that comes with that choice. We are a grassroots affiliate of the broader United Nations Playing for the Planet Alliance, which is focused on industry-wide major company commitments to serve sustainability goals, to serve our future as a hopefully more carbon neutral or carbon negative industry, and is really just meant to be like a first access point to all of the initiatives that are happening all over the place. And so we are a professional industry like special interest group that's part of the broader IGDA, and partnering with a lot of studios already. There are over 700 now members worldwide of varying levels of engagement in our Discord, most of which like come from the industry and games research space. And so part of the work that we've been doing is to not only have a safe space for us to just acknowledge that the climate crisis is real and we're all getting impacted by it without having to worry about having to convince somebody that it's real, but also taking the discussion points that are happening and turning them into resources so that this information is easier to vet, easier to incorporate into our design processes, all of those really important things. And so as a community in the past few years, we've been coming out with open source resources that are freely accessible based off of what's happening in the industry. We've also been supporting game developers getting connected to each other to create more climate conscious studios, mentoring and participating in game jams, providing support for climate and pro-environmental game bundles, like Humble Earth Day bundle as an example. It's been a really, really incredible experience. When we talk about the levers that we have as an industry and as game developers, the three biggest questions that come up when new game developers come into the space, be it people that are fresh out of grad school or people that have been in the industry for 20 plus years, it tends to be, how do I make a climate conscious game? How do I measure my carbon footprint? And how do I convince other people that this is something that's worth investing in? We've created 3 main work streams that are in alignment with that to address those major challenges. Climate councils for advocacy, industry benchmarking to understand what it means to define a carbon footprint, and get research and share research when more and more data comes available. And design patterns, which is more around like the actual like behavior and attitudinal intent that can come from game design itself. For the purpose of our very short time today, before we dive into the Q&A, we'll be focusing on the game design piece, mostly because how we think about game design, what constitutes a good game, and what constitutes like revenue generation, all has a direct impact in our carbon emissions and how we measure it and define it, as well as how we then communicate this opportunity and the potential influence we have to other people. So the design patterns workstream itself, hopefully it's updating, are broken down into 3 main projects, one of which is a climate games database, which just basically collects games that have some environmental or climate conscious messaging so that we can get a better understanding of what's happened already and how well they did in the market, or what topics potentially haven't been covered that could be a new and interesting game that our industry hasn't seen yet. The environmental game design playbook, which serves as the foundational grounding to understand environmental psychology in alignment with game design tactics, and the action wiki, which is what we're working on now, that is focused on understanding what best practices exist when we want to have a real world climate action represented in the game. But I understand if there's still that fear in our heads, or that imposter syndrome that rings about, like, we're just game developers, like we just want to make games, like can I even do anything? But I'd like to say that, believe it or not, we as game developers are uniquely positioned to inspire this positive behavior change because we're already inherently thinking about systems. And when we think about fun, which is like one of the biggest questions we will always get asked, like, is this game fun though, when you're pitching or playing in a playtest? It's often never that simple, much like taking action in service of the climate is never that simple. But we can break it down into smaller subatomic components. So if we think about, hopefully this animation happens. If it doesn't, I'm gonna be very sad. It's okay. From a games research standpoint, we break these down into smaller pieces. So it's not just about like whether or not a game is fun. It's, do we understand what players want when they go into a game? Do they understand what's going on? Do they feel fulfilled when they're doing it? There are a lot of questions that we need to answer before we can have like a single answer to whether or not it's fun and fulfilling. So if we think about prior knowledge, one of the first questions we'll ask is, do we understand what players expect when they're coming into the game? Are they a player who's been in this genre for a really, really long time? Or are we reaching new audiences that have never engaged with our games before? We'll think about the core loop. Do players understand what they have to do, and are they able to complete it? we'll then talk about like actual needs fulfillment. Like, do they feel a sense of achievement when they're engaging in the core loop? What do they emotionally and psychologically experience? And do they do it in a way that they feel a sense of meaning and purpose as they're continuing to progress through the game? But with that in mind, if we have a clear understanding and we don't feel that there are major barriers that are preventing players from being able to experience the design goals of your game, we can then get a stronger signal of, do they appreciate it? Is it time well spent? Is it a valuable enough experience that players are willing to evangelize it to other players who will then pay for and engage with your content? And so breaking down our games as complex systems is really important for our work in the climate movement, which is why I think game developers can save the planet. But individual and collective action and people taking action that results in like meaningful impact towards a more resilient industry and community is really, really hard. It can often feel like a black box, and creating systemic change never happens overnight. And so it can feel really overwhelming and get us back to that place of fight, flight, or freeze mode. When we think about the opportunities to leverage the massive reach we have, it can be really hard to pitch to your team like, this is the game we need to make, because there's often a bias about whether or not this is going, like a negative bias about this may not make money, players may not get it, like, are we really the experts to engage in this type of topic? And one, screw imposter syndrome. Two, I would say that, again, we are very well positioned to do this work because we also see small proof points in others in spaces within the industry. So some quick examples that I will bring up here is in the gaming and education space. So in 2014, I was part of a nonprofit gaming educational company called Glass Lab. And we had philanthropic grants to take AAA games like SimCity, Plants vs. Zombies, Words with Friends, Civ, and basically embed an assessment engine underneath so that middle school science teachers and English teachers could understand how children were learning. And what we found in a study of about 400 players across the United States is that players who engaged in this game had statistically significant improvements in their ability to identify and talk about complex systems. So that's understanding the cause and effect in which a problem and solution play a role in like the world that you're in. And so another example on the more like emotional and psychological side of things is Jack, who years and years ago had played Firewatch, and had such a passion for the game and had such a positive experience in the game that inspired him to go see Firewatch lookouts with his dad. It enabled his passion for energy conservation and environmental conservation. He ended up going to university with a focus on sustainable tourism and wildland conservation. And it also impacted his awareness and willingness to engage in racial justice and the Black Lives Matter movement, because he saw how people of color were getting treated in the wildland conservation space. And so we have information and data to indicate games can help us learn new skills. Games can emotionally compel us to build a sense of purpose. And we have more direct actions that that different studios across the industry have also implemented that reduce the amount of time players go from being aware that the climate crisis exists to taking action. Some of the examples that are shown on the page here involve companies like Us2 Games, who have mapped game purchases to environmental conservation projects. So they were able to plant 1 million trees as a result of this integration, and as a result of players deciding to want to play Alba, a wildlife adventure. And so we have many of these opportunities. And when we think about connecting the dots to go from these like actions that can be mapped to purchases all the way to long-term behavior change, it's important for us to think about like what are our hypotheses, like how do we break down that big idea into its subatomic components. And we can take a lot of what we know from game design and game research to do this work, recognizing time constraints. So if we take what I mentioned earlier about breaking down a game into its individual systems, we can start with, what is the context in which players make decisions about the games that they want to make? What are the decisions that they make as general consumers and humans about how they operate and exist and respond to the world around them? This is also where the energy efficiency piece comes into play, because not all players will have access to high-end PCs and consoles. Increasingly, more people are mobile, and increasingly more people are going to internet cafes or leveraging lower-end PCs because of the price point and because of everything that's going on right now. And so thinking about the context is really important. If we can understand where players are, we can then have a better sense of what they need to be aware of in order to get closer to being willing to do something about it. And so what do they acknowledge needs to exist? If they can acknowledge something exists, can we help them understand the problem? And what are the potential cause and effects that we can not only keep in mind in our own individual decision making, but how we advocate to our friends, our families, our loved ones, our institutions, our governments, so that we can have more opportunities to like create the future that we want to create. If we can establish the context, the awareness, the knowledge that a potential player can use or at least articulate in their social systems, we can then think about like how do we help prepare players to be ready to act if an opportunity is available to them. And not all climate action opportunities are available to everyone for many different types of reasons, but can we create a sense of confidence and readiness with it? And I think it's important here to call out, and I promise I'm almost done, thank you moderators, is that we've had science and tech for many years. Maria Sands, who's the CEO of Us2 Games, says this really well. Like, we've had the science forever. That doesn't necessarily mean that we feel emotionally connected to do something about it. And so what we need to do is change hearts and minds, which games are very, very good at. And so when we think about giving players the agency to engage in the core loop that is climate action, we have to think about not only whether or not they feel confident in being able to talk about those things, but we actually have to make sure that they care about it enough and find it to be important enough to them. And so self-confidence here and the willingness to engage in this very complex topic has to be paired with a narrative or a context in which they feel that it's important to have a pro-environmental attitude, and they feel like it's important enough to maintain hope. And the main thing that I'll say here is that hope itself is not a feeling. It's not just an emotion. It's actually a goal-directed form of thinking and critical thinking, where we see what the cause and effect is. We think the effect of the work that we're doing is worth it enough and important enough that even when we face obstacles and challenges, it's worth continuing. And that's something that can be very difficult when we're dealing with all of the existential crises that we're dealing with today. And so self-efficacy in this model of continued experience towards action is really about making sure that we as players and developers feel equipped and confident, knowing that if an opportunity presented itself, we could keep doing it and do so because it matters to us. So if we can establish the knowledge that players need, that perceived confidence that comes from being able to kind of honestly redefine our relationship with failure, because in games, if we fail, we can try again and get help through the game or with other players until we find that accomplishment, which we can't always do in the real world. But assuming we can do this in games, we're much better equipped to enable players to act when a real world opportunity happens. And the more we as game developers talk about this, the more we have conversations around this, the more likely those actions will happen. And the more players will normalize the idea that pro-environmental behavior, pro-environmental values, and a greater resiliency to deal with future environmental and cultural threats will enable us to get that long-term impact. And that will enable us to then go back and break down the pieces that we feel are really important and define what solutions make the most sense for us. I recognize I've now gone way over time, but the main thing to take away, I think, before we head to a short break and then come back to the group discussion with our wonderful panelists, is that change often doesn't require a massive change in a single day. It doesn't require us to fundamentally rethink every single aspect of our life as it relates to making and playing games. But there are a lot of smaller opportunities that matter. And the more that we all do them and find the ones that are right for us, the more we can actually create a more climate conscious industry that will inevitably impact our bottom line. If you're interested in learning more or engaging with more like-minded developers and researchers, definitely check out the website, igdaclimatesig.org. And now we'll go into a short break and then go back to the group discussion.
All right, everyone, welcome back, and thank you so much, Paula, for that very insightful presentation. Thanks for introducing us to the topic of sustainability, especially in terms of the game industry and digital entertainment industry, from which a lot of our students will be joining in the very near future. So the second part of the Game for Thought stream is going to be focused on a group panel discussion. And just as I mentioned before, if you have any questions, and it's awesome, we're already seeing a lot of questions come into the chat. If you have any questions, pop them in there. Just make sure to put a capital Q before the question. And with that, I'd like to introduce our lovely panelists for the evening. Of course, we have Paula, who you just heard from. Thank you, Paula, for the presentation. Thank you, thank you. We have Tim Wagendorp. He is the sustainability coordinator at the Flemish Audiovisual Fund called VAF, located here in Flanders in Belgium. And we also have Xalavier Nelson Jr. joining us from the US. Xalavier is the studio head of Strange Scaffold. Paula, Xalavier, Tim, thank you so much for joining. How's everyone feeling tonight?
I've already talked a lot, so somebody else should go. But yes, doing well.
So I have to say, we previously, before this panel began, we agreed that if we get through all of the pre-submitted questions, which we never do, ever, we usually get through like 8 before the guest questions. If we do that tonight, I will dye my hair lime green. Was that the color we agreed on?
Yes, it was.
Yes, it was.
So. Or the chat could vote. I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, or the chat could vote. So if we get through,
Chat, you already have enough power. It's lime green. That's what we
so all 15 questions, if they are finished, my hair will become green. That is a deal. I virtually shook on it. So we will see. Alrighty, but I want to jump into it. So Paula, talk to us a bit about her experience with sustainability, particularly in the game industry. So Paula, you work in the game industry. Xalavier, I want to hear a bit about you and your experience, and then we'll go on to Tim, and then we'll jump into the chat questions.
I've been in the industry almost 14 years now, 7 of them on the development side of the house. Started in games journalism, moved to game writing, went to narrative design, then realized I didn't necessarily care how good the story was. I knew I could tell a good story. I wanted the story to be good. But what I cared about more was making sure that the game came out on time, on budget, and that it didn't destroy people in the process of making it. And so I transitioned to production and management and biz dev and all sorts of other things. And now I not only contribute narrative design and overall expertise to other studios, but run my own, trying with an explicit studio motto at Strange Scaffold, trying to make games better, faster, cheaper, and healthier than the industry assumes can be done. In the past 7 years, I've worked on over 70 games. I've had the opportunity to see the industry from a lot of different angles at pretty much every level of seniority. And with that perspective, getting some sort of bird's eye view, big picture perspective, how I would define sustainability is essentially positioning people to be able to make their next work. And so many of the inherent work cultures in not just games, but digital media in general, specifically inhibit that process. Sustainability is about enabling personal growth and personal survival, regardless of our overall circumstances. And when you're working on one game for 4 years, whether you're an indie or not, that doesn't give you much space to build up a catalog of new experiences, to grow as a person. You kind of have to be in, there's this weird effect where you kind of have to be in stasis for the production cycle, or at least as long as you're a part of it. And if that game also will decide the fate of your studio, the amount of risk and overall deciding factors on whether or not you'll be able to make your next game is kind of horrifying to attach to a single product. Especially when you consider 4 years can be put on a SpongeBob license game. SpongeBob license games are great, but like to work on a game and break on to think, abstractly, oh, I'm going to break against the rocks, but at least I'll have worked on, The Last of Us. That's one thing. But what if you don't work on a game that gets 90 net Metacritic? That's the sorts of things that I want us to be talking and thinking about, and that our medium is woefully unprepared to answer.
All right. Thank you so much, Xalavier, for that very insightful answer. So for what I hear from you, and you actually read my mind because that was my next question, is that kind of how you define sustainability is making sure that the person is able to produce their next work and in the best way possible for them.
If every Strange Scaffold game is designed so that everyone can walk away from it unscathed on a personal level, because a studio can go down, a franchise can disappear, but it's the creative voices that are going to ensure that the medium not only survives but thrives.
Okay. Wonderful.
I need to make my answers shorter so that we can get through this list.
Yeah, we have 14 questions to go.
Topic.
All right, wonderful. Thank you so much, Tim. I'd love to hear from you. So, Tim, you work for the Flemish Audiovisual Fund. You are an expert in sustainability, but we just talked a little bit earlier. You aren't intrinsically within the game industry. Tell me more about what you work on and how you find to be the meaning, the definition of sustainability.
Okay, next question, please. No. As a fund, we try to translate sustainability for audiovisual sector in Flanders. And one of the biggest questions I posed when I started my job about 5 years ago was, where does it start and where does it stop? Doesn't it start at school, where you study to become a great professional? Are you taught enough about sustainability and all the challenges as a professional? Is it embedded in the stories we create, both on screen, the complexity to create these questions, these stories? Because when you write Superman has to explode the Eiffel Tower, you have to make it happen and it will have an impact. Next top is production. What's the impact of a film or a game or in the making of a project? Now at the end it's about the consumption. And my focus is film and audiovisual, but the same with games. What's the impact of me watching Netflix, going to the cinema, joining a film festival, etc. So that's a bit the scope of my work, and that in what is sustainable, is it reducing CO2 or is it something else? I think, and as you said before, it's about an awareness. It's about making a lot of decisions in whatever project or phase of your project, and maybe you have to decide something which is not the best option, but the best of the but you can, within the limits of time, money, creativity, environment, about awareness and calculated choices. For me, questions that pop up all the time is sustain a what and sustain a when. What is sustainability? Is it CO2 something else? And sustain a when? When can you say I did a good job? I hope that we will be able to tackle that in the questions.
Right. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Tim, for joining. Thank you. So I hear from all of you that sustainability, it is the environmental impacts, but also it seems like it goes far beyond just the environmental facet of it. Although it goes far beyond, I do want to start with the environmental side of games. It's something that to my knowledge, it's not discussed as much as it should be by individuals who consume games, who play games. And when you look into sustainability, when you look into it in terms of games and digital entertainment, a phrase that comes up a lot is carbon footprint. And I want to hear from you three more about that carbon footprint. What is it? How can it actually be measured in terms of a game and the game industry? What are the impacts of this carbon footprint that we hear of when we look into sustainability? And how can it be measured?
Happy to get us started.
Go right ahead.
So the measurement piece, I will like fully admit, and I think everyone on this call probably knows, like it's very fraught with a lot of debate. Like what is like how do we most accurately measure the different ways in which we're emitting carbon into the atmosphere? What do we consider our realm of influence and impact? And in general, we often hear questions of like, okay, what's the player's responsibility? What's the developer's responsibility? What's the publisher's responsibility? What's the hardware manufacturer's responsibility? And the reality is it's all of us. And so when we think about carbon footprint, it's the amount of carbon that's generated when we're mining our minerals to create our chips that go into our hardware. It's the transportation that we need when we're visiting to like industry conferences or traveling to and from work. It's when we decide to, it's energy that we use when we're compiling our builds at night. And so all of those factors play a massive role, and the way in which we can measure it is very difficult because not everybody has clean energy grids. Every city, every region will source their electricity and their energy in a number of different ways. And so a lot of the conversations right now in partnership with more practiced and expert sustainability professionals is figuring out like how do we go about understanding that more.
I'm
Wonderful.
deeply concerned about the environmental impact of the games industry going forward, because we are a medium that is not just art but technology based, and we aren't setting a cap on
I believe,
what
I'm sorry, so sorry to interrupt. There's a slight echo, I believe. I'm not sure if I'm the only one picking that up. On Xalavier's side, we're good? Thumbs up?
testing 1, 2, 3.
Okay, now you're good.
Cool.
Sorry about that. Go right ahead, Xalavier.
I was just gonna say I'm deeply worried about the industry's environmental impact going forward, because we're an artistic and technical medium, and there isn't a cap being set on really what we are making and how we're making it. We have a certain definition of what a camera looks like in a film. We have an idea of what production looks like in music and in other industries, which means we have concrete ways to measure our carbon footprint and also go forward and render down those processes. Video games are have perpetually been, at least for the past few decades, in a state of escalation. Graphics become more photorealistic. The data that players are using to communicate to each other has higher fidelity, and there's more of it. We're not just releasing games, but we're also releasing updates for those games at the speed of sound, light, whatever is your equivalent for your local internet grid. So yeah, we are our carbon footprint is defined by our production processes, and because we have not determined basically the box that games are made within, and then making things within that box, but continually expanding it, that means that our carbon footprint and our environmental impact is only going to expand, even though we're making less plastic. We aren't making cartridges really for the most part anymore. We aren't dumping them into the ground and burying them as with the ET incident, but we are in terms of the energy grid and our impact on the overall world, even in terms of chipsets, as you've mentioned, just expanding our impact on the wider global ecosystem. And if we don't set a cap on that, if we don't address that very directly, I have fears about where that goes next.
Tim, anything to add to that? Coming from more of the film side, the TV side, do you hear similarities between this conversation and the conversations that you typically hear?
Yes, we use a carbon calculator to measure the impact of film productions. And in a way, what you don't measure, you can't manage. So it's a way to understand the relative importance of things. We all agree that plastic straws are something to be banned, but in production, it's a drop of water on a hot plate. It's in the transport and the energy and the materials that you have the real impact. So it's about knowing where to put your efforts. And it's also a way a way to dig deeper. the calculator we use, it doesn't only talk about and this multi-angle compass on looking at the real impact. And a question I always pose myself is, imagine you have a carbon neutral project, but your boss is a sexist. Is that sustainable? So for me, it's just one tool to look at one small element of production of your project, and it's also a way to, and it's amazing when you think about the average Flemish film production represents about 70 tons of carbon. In the UK, it's 700, and in the States, it's 7,000 tons of carbon, which is the equivalent in Flanders of 10 households in a year. You can be hyper sustainable at home, eat veggie all year, and do everything you want in your private life. But as a professional, you have a potential impact, or you can have a potential reduction of that impact, which is much higher than everything you do at home. In a way, by being a good professional, can really make a change. You do something that your grandchildren will really be proud of.
So Tim, from what you say, which is wonderful, you use a carbon calculator to estimate that your carbon footprint for a production, for example, that you work on. I wonder if there may be, Paula or Xalavier, maybe you know, are there any organizations or studios that stick out in your mind in terms of measuring their impact, acknowledging these issues, and actually, taking action on them, or not yet?
Starting to hear pockets of. Also, Paula, are you muted?
Yep, but you can go first.
Okay. Just want to make sure. There's pockets of greater environmental and human sustainability acknowledgement. I love what Tim mentioned, where it's like, if you have a carbon neutral production, but it's sexist, you aren't sustainable. We're getting things like game studios, especially in Australia, acknowledging the native lands and the native owners and original inhabitants of the land that their games are being produced on, even feeding money from and profits from their games back to those communities to which they owe the environment in which they're now making their games. We are seeing acknowledgement of environmental impact, but as far as I know, Tim, for example, I don't know if there's a carbon calculator that I've heard of anywhere in games, or if it is, it's very rare and only hooked up to productions or companies that have the infrastructure to track that kind of thing. And there's always going to be, unfortunately, when I think through that from a biz dev's perspective, there's always going to be a benefit to, if that isn't a factor for success in your medium, hiding that as a metric. Because if we knew the true cost of a Fortnite update, not just the production of it and how much goes into iterating on this massive world, but also the millions of people downloading it, that might not look super pretty on a report or like as a thing for potential tax rebates. So you just quietly don't track it since it isn't an industry standard.
I will say from companies that show positive signals that it's something that they care about. There are over 30 companies now across mobile, console, PC that have made like public sustainability commitments. Organizations that have massive supply chains like Sony and Microsoft are working on like increasing the transparency that they have end to end for our carbon footprint. And studios, Ubisoft, Space Ape Games, and Us2 Games are really, really good examples of companies that have taken the initiative to understand their carbon footprint and try to communicate out like what is the process by which other game developers can also follow suit. But I also very strongly agree that we don't have a single carbon calculator that everybody can consider the source of truth or the gold standard of things. Please create one. Whoever is listening, Tim, no pressure. All of the pressure, please make it. But as a result of that, and as a result of our industry's tendency to exist in silos, like historically, it's very individualistic and not collectivist. It means we have a lot of different pockets of information that, if put together, would make all of this a lot easier. Yeah.
We made a European calculator with a bunch of film funds, and backed up by Catholic University of Leuven with scientists and specialists on that matter. But for me, it's important to know, is it a fetish to have the exact number of your project? And it'd be like a statistical orgasm, or do you want to use the data from that calculator to make the right decisions and to think about what's the difference between veggie or non-veggie, or a cloud or a server in my cellar, etc. So is it a tool to make right choices, or is it a tool to report about how bad or how good you were, or both? We as a fund, we link the use of such a tool to the funding. So if I give you public money, I will tell you, Paula, here you have a bunch of cash, but spend it wisely, and Tim will help you to think about the choices. And the tool to use is a calculator. It's not a magic stick, it's just a compass.
Right.
Oh, I know that painfully well. Yes. Thank you for making me
You
feel
have to
seen.
do the work after. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for that insight. So when we talk about sustainability in general, so I'm gonna be honest, when I mention sustainability in games, a lot of people there's a big question mark that comes to their head, and they're a bit confused as to how sustainability could have anything to do with games, or even film for that matter, Tim. And I wonder where that confusion comes from, where that lack of, I guess, of information comes from. Even before, to be completely transparent, before I started at Digital Arts and Entertainment, I would have never had any idea about sustainability and the importance of it within games. Why might you think that might be?
Because we are so good in being...
Yeah, go for it, Tim. You go first.
I think that, one, we are so good in being creative. And there is nobody, or there are not enough people like me maybe, that try to think about what's the positive and negative aspect of what we make. And what you see at the European level is you have different initiatives popping up, but they all have different opinions on what is sustainability, or when is something sustainable, or how to handle it. And I think that we need a stronger voice, and we should also not only talk in problems. We shouldn't talk about CO2 in the stratosphere, but we should talk about solutions and share these solutions, even when we might be competitors. But and again, that Eureka calculator that we made is a perfect example. Now something can be shared by other people to make a difference.
I love what your point about not only talking about problems, but talking about solutions. Because I think so often it can be, when we talk about these things, sustainability, but also I think other topics as well, that we cover on Game for Thought, it can become an echo chamber of problems. But there are solutions, and I think that's an exciting aspect to talk about, and actually I think the most meaningful. Paula, I think you wanted to add something.
I was going to say, like, the hope piece is a really big part of it. But I will also say that as an industry, and I know that there were some comments about, like, don't take me away from my games. Like, I escape here because the real world is really hard. Like, don't harsh my buzz, please. I think that's something that our industry has really carried and taken seriously, right? And I think it's not a matter of taking us away from that experience and that sense of escapism and immersion that is really, really important to us as an industry and for all sorts of media. But I think that because of that mindset, we're not used to thinking of players as whole people. We're used to thinking about players that are motivated to play action RPGs because they want a sense of achievement and story, and like that's the box. And the reality is that none of us exist in that box. We're incredibly multifaceted people. Our needs are constantly changing. And how we operate in the world and how we choose to escape and immerse ourselves in other digital environments and new worlds we've never explored before and meeting new people we've never talked to before is highly dependent upon what is going on in our real life. This is the reason why our industry's position on accessibility has grown substantially in the recent years, because we realize we want more players to come to the table and feel like they're a part of the community, because it helps our bottom line, and we literally restrict our ability to make money if we're excluding people who could otherwise pay for games they like. And it's the same case for diversity and inclusion, as you all know, and acknowledging that there are different lenses of identity with which we have to design our experiences around. But I will say that for any folks that are like, oh, like gamers just want to play games, we have research that has come out through the United Nations program, as well as a study that Unity Technologies in Yale recently came out with this year, that signals two very specific, like very important statistics. One of which is that of 1.2 million mobile players, or players who have access to mobile games, which do not just mean mobile, 64% of them think that climate change is a global emergency and expect governments to do more and companies to do more. And for the Yale study, it's that on average, players who were polled in the United States scored higher on caring about the climate crisis, wanting to do something about it, being more willing to engage in climate action relative to the broader US population from the original Yale 5 Americas study. And so gamers, because we engage in intentional conflict, and because we have reframed our relationship with failure because of the gaming experiences that we love having, position us really well to do this type of work. And the more our, real world is impacted, the more that's going to impact our time that we can spend playing games, the time we can make meaningful connections and get good, to be honest. So
that is fascinating, and actually, Paula, something that I've never personally thought of before. The way that players experience problem solving and conflict resolution within games, it also is very relevant outside of the game, and yeah, has connections with climate change and sustainability as well. I'm looking at the time right now.
It's really hard to be creative when we're all just trying to survive. So.
Exactly. Couldn't have put it better. I'm looking at the time, and I want to get through two questions that were actually submitted by students, and I find them very interesting. One question, it actually perfectly segues from Paula's point. She mentions diversity and inclusion. When we talk about sustainability, and sustainability in games, digital entertainment, film, TV, you name it. Again, we think of the environmental impacts perhaps first. We think of the carbon footprint, for example. But one may also argue that diversity and inclusion are also part of the story of sustainability. And I want to ask you three, how? How do diversity and inclusion have a space in the story of sustainability in games or film, of course?
The same way that any natural ecosystem that only has, for example, a single crop will eventually be depleted. The more we get more voices into the room, more perspectives, and empower them to utilize those perspectives to affect production processes, creative processes, and the sustainability efforts surrounding games, not only does the wider environment in which that stuff takes place become more sustainable, because it isn't resting on singular tent poles or only people who played The Legend of Zelda when they were 8 years old exactly and are now making more of that. What you also get is this incredible ability to take in a wide variety of perspectives and solve problems in utterly unique ways. Diversity and inclusion are vital to games growing in their quality as well as in their environmental and economic sustainability, logistical sustainability. Mm-hmm. And when you see companies embrace that, you can literally see the difference in their products thereafter.
So you see the influence in the content.
Yeah, and your games get better. We could talk all day, and I'm very passionate about talking about how the processes behind your games will get better But if someone's just like, I just want good games, your favorite games now are increasingly being built by more diverse teams. And that's why they are having the impact on you that they can. It's because you have different people in the room from different backgrounds, different gaming perspectives, saying this is going to be our players' favorite game. This is going to be this quest that they won't forget. This is going to be a character that our players can see themselves in, that never would have been produced before if the media diet, the cultural background, and the cultural perspective of the creators behind it was, we could, to put it very frankly, just a bunch of straight white dudes who grew up playing games and have a very specific definition of what games can be.
Tim, I wonder if you have anything to add, specifically from the Flemish Audiovisual Fund, and also from more of the film background. How you also include diversity and inclusion within the definition of sustainability.
Paula mentioned the United Nations developed the Sustainable Development Goals, which are 17 visions of sustainability. I'm not going to explain all of it, but just Google them. It's called SDGs. They're really great. They're not perfect because one of the goals that's missing is the right for culture. But it's a broader vision of sustainability, including education, economics, biodiversity, etc. And I also have to convince my colleagues in my fund that if they work on diversity on a set or on inclusion, that it's also part of that broader sustainable challenge. But we, as a fund, try to translate it in practical measures for the project we fund in our region. It's a broader scope.
Mm-hmm. All right. Thank you so much, Tim. One more question from the pre-submitted list. I hate to disappoint you three as well as the chat. However, we will not get to all 15 questions, which means no green hair. It stays orange for now. Maybe next time. All right, one final question from the pre-submitted.
Is there any chance we can do a speed run round?
We could, where everyone says one word.
3 words or less.
Yeah, everyone just says one word. All right, I something when I was thinking about sustainability and how to actually put it into action within your organization or your studio, something that immediately came to mind was studio size, and the size of your organization and how that might influence your ability, both your awareness of these issues with regards to sustainability, but also your ability to do something about it. So you three, coming from different backgrounds within the industry, I'd love to hear your take in terms of studio or organization size.
I'll say for me, I think the question is less about organization size and like who you bring in for your talent, right? And there is a question of like funding and resources, because all of us exist on like whether or not players are willing to buy our games. So our resource constraints are painfully real all the time. And smaller organizations, like, it is more difficult because you're having to wear multiple hats. There's only so many things you can do in a day. And so you have to be very mindful about that. But I think that's where like the diversity inclusion aspect is very important, because having people who come from different walks of life, who have different perspectives, different skill sets, different lived experiences, come to the table to like really like poke holes in our business models, poke holes in our design hypotheses, is incredibly important for our ability to act, not only in terms of creating a great game, but increasing our potential reach and influence.
Xalavier or Tim, go right ahead.
I think that size doesn't matter, and I will give you the perfect example. There's a film festival in Flanders, and they decided that they needed a strategic plan on sustainability. There are 12 people, and they engaged all their stakeholders with the question, what are the domains of the SDGs, the sustainable goals that we should focus on as a small festival film distributor. And based on that, they developed a plan, a mission, a vision, and a strategy, which again is then translated into practical deliverables for every member of staff, from the boss to the volunteer and everybody in between. It's also about, if you're big or small, if you have a good plan, stick to that plan. Size doesn't matter. It's not like a one-person challenge. It's a team building. It's everybody's challenge.
Sure. And it also, I mean, of course, depends who is on the team, and their own personal backgrounds and lived experiences as well. Xalavier, I wonder if you have anything to add as well?
The studio perspective, I think less so in the sense of size. I would agree that like you're always making a custom plan and a solid plan around economic, logistical, and environmental sustainability, regardless of the size of your company, and that's always going to, or your organization, that's always going to change. But the thing I think of more so than team size is team accommodation and accessibility, because that plays a huge role in the environmental and, again, logistical impact that your studio is having on the world at large. If your studio has remote work as an option, that cuts out the carbon footprint of a car, that allows for people who could traditionally not work on a game in certain situations. Say they are parent of a very young child, say they are dealing with a bereavement or an illness. There's so many ways in which, because we assume that a work week is 40 hours, that the time necessary for someone to accomplish a task means that they have to be full time on an entire project from beginning to end, and also that's the only way that they should be credited for their work on said game. If they leave early, they don't get credit. That's a whole other consideration and discussion point within the industry. When we have more accessibility inside of our studios and studio arrangements, it allows us to build up the personal sustainability and mitigate the environmental impact that our studios have. And for that reason, that is one bright light in the video game industry's future, because it's a forerunner of a lot of overall labor movements and discussions around this topic, especially when it comes to tech. I don't see Silicon Valley companies talking about moving to a 4-day work week. Games companies are having that discussion very actively, and studios big and small are already doing it. Flexible work hours, common sync up hours, so that people can, who have different circadian rhythms, which is a scientifically proven thing, and all these other different factors that let them create powerful, wonderful things for our players in the way that is most sustainable for them and also best for our planet. We keep broadening that definition more and more as a medium, and we've been doing it at light speed since the pandemic has started. And that is something that gives me a lot of hope for the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you think about it, I mean, just thinking about it from what you say now, for example, the 4-day work week, that it's an example of personal, maintaining your own sustainability, but also it has such an impact on environmental sustainability. And so these two facets of sustainability that we so often seem to see as two distinct domains, they really are very much intertwined in more ways than I think we tend to think. So thank you.
I will also say from a business. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, Paula. Go ahead.
Just like one more potential lens to consider for this topic. When we think about like sustainable game development, we think about sustainable business operations. I think the thing that also gets lost and it relates to mental health and crunch culture is that when we are having to go towards like the single monolithic goal of revenue generation, and we don't factor in our developers' lived experiences, what our developers and team members have to think about when they're also having to get their work done in a very crunchy environment, that limits our ability to be proactive about mitigating risk. And when we think about crunch culture and how we've been motivated to like get the game built and live sooner, that has an impact on who we hire, how we make our design decisions, how we operate in terms of like how we onboard new team members to tooling and how we create the back end of our systems. And if we don't allow time for creativity and strategic problem solving and risk mitigation, which comes with the sustainability topic overall, that not only increases crunch and mental health risk for our developer partners, but if a tool goes down or we don't have the time to think about the systems that we're creating, we increase our tech debt later on down the line. And if we lose a day of productivity because tooling is broken or we didn't design a system for, over 10,000 players or 500 players, that's a day's worth of electricity also spent that you paid money on that does not increase your revenue down the line. And so there are all these things that sustainability actually plays a positive role in.
It goes much further.
Makes you more money, it turns out. Having better production processes makes you more money, and you spend less money in the process. It's good for the planet. It just makes sense.
Sounds like a game.
I love this enthusiasm so much.
I just wanted to add, Xalavier mentioned young parents. I think that when you're trying to survive in your job and are under a lot of stress, you can't think about anything else than survive. And Paula mentioned freezing or fleeing. If in that situation somebody like me comes to you, say you have to think about your environmental impact, then you say, fuck off. You don't have mental availability for that. So if we don't take care of ourselves and our people, can't take care of something else. And for me, it's interconnected. It's linked together.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Because, at the end of the day, then you don't have that mental capacity. Thank you so much. And with that, I would love to head over to some lovely audience questions. Thank you so much, everyone in the chat, for being super active during the stream and asking lots of great questions. So let us start. I see the question from KBBQ. TF. How bad are data servers for the environment? A broad question.
This question since I'm in cloud, but somebody else is also welcome to start.
Data servers, are they bad and how?
Sure.
Go ahead,
yeah,
Paula.
I mean, like it's all energy spent, right? It's all electricity. Like the server farms can be bad if they're not running on clean grids, like first and foremost, and it's the same for our cities overall. And this isn't just in gaming, like our cloud services, the way we process information, the things that keep our governments like running in a data informed way, ideally. All of that comes back to how our governments decide to source our energy. And so our footprint is massive. Our dependency on servers, very massive. And so if we take into consideration the way in which people like play games, that has a direct role in how we then calculate like the impact of that. Cloud and mobile, for instance, run on the assumption that players will be more mobile. They won't be as connected. They may be on devices that are not plugged into the wall, for instance. But the way in which those games are processed and streamed still have a cost. And until we have all of our servers that we use run on clean energy, like that is going to have a severe impact on our carbon footprint. That being said, depending on where you live and depending on devices that you do use, your gameplay sessions can be more energy efficient, say if you're running on cloud. It just depends on all of those other factors.
So it depends on several factors, particularly clean energy. All right. Thanks, Paula. On to the next question. So I see climate change is a bit of a depressing subject. People aren't that excited to hear about. How do you integrate this in a game that people play to have fun without the main goal, fun, being prevented or lessened?
I think one of the most effective and magical sources of game design and goals that game design can achieve is integrating you into the processes, procedures, and mindset of a different world. Say what you will about Hideo Kojima, Death Stranding is fascinating in the way that it pulls you into the perspective of its world. You are thinking about, okay, I bring my boots, always make sure I have 2 ladders and 1 climbing baton. I don't use these things. I'm superstitious about these things. Can avoid this area, circle around this. When your brain begins to, with its magical plasticity, mold itself to a different environment, as a matter of problem solving, as a matter of existence, that is one of the coolest things that humanity has access to. It's a shared hallucination in the best way possible, without the ill effects, except for maybe a sleepless night, you would get from a variety of other substances that give you access to this kind of experience. So, with that in mind, when we're talking about climate disaster and its impact on game design and how you integrate that into a game without making it more necessarily a depressing experience. One, we go into depressing game experiences all the time because it provides us with interesting problems to solve and interesting worlds to adapt to. But two, the idea of in a game having a variety of options, all displayed with realistic impacts upon its world. Say, transportation. You can drive. There's small ways that our game design tweaks could communicate the value of a different way of seeing the world. So, one of the inherent issues I would identify with the Grand Theft Auto series is that pretty much every mission in Grand Theft Auto requires you to drive like sometimes like 15 real-time actual minutes of your human life to get to the next mission point. If in that game you had the option to drive, but if you found a bus stop and took the bus, it was a fast travel to a bus stop point nearby. You're suddenly communicating a value judgment and a positive association in terms of time saved, in terms of you don't have to say out loud environmental impact, but it's just better to take the bus. There's all these ways in which our game design standards have associated the best practices and most effective practices with things that aren't necessarily positive that aren't necessarily positive messages to take forward without turning your game into a morality play. You can say, what are our overall goals for our organization? We want people to have clean energy grids. Well, in a SimCity like game, what are ways that we create a positive association with clean energy grids and the benefits that they provide long term? Suddenly you have a very potent basis as players to engage with the designers, while, if anything, building a more active and intentional experience together. The worst game design comes from when we take things for granted, like, they'll just have to drive. We can build things better.
Someone says in the chat, someone in the chat is very excited about faster transport in Grand Theft Auto. I see additionally an interesting sub question, I guess, from that question. It's not a question, but a statement. Have to make sure the gameplay in a post-climate change world isn't too fun, or else people will just kind of want that world then. How do you respond to that?
I have a very strong opinion about this. So I don't mean to burst anyone's bubble who still thinks that games are isolated experiences that immerse and escape. The reality is that games are still very much like, as mentioned previously, they're inherently lenses with which we view what's viable and reasonable in the world, or completely unreasonable. And climate change narratives and social justice narratives have been present in games since its inception. Final Fantasy was an anti-corporate narrative about a company that took all of the world's resources. Gears of War franchise is honestly a meta narrative about fracking. And so the reality of a lot of the games that have gained commercial success in our spaces based in reality or in near future or based in complete fantasy are like a lot of the 90s and early 2000s were grounded in the assumption that the apocalypse was going to happen no matter what. So all of our narratives were about like, you're already in the apocalypse, so you're just going to have to deal with it. And you can be the hero of the story because everything else is fucked up already. And like in the pandemic, in 2020, there's actually like onward, there's research from organizations like Quantic Foundry, for instance, that indicate there's actually a shift. People like some audiences are decreasing their consumption of competitive experiences and indexing harder on positive social experiences and slow like cottage core relaxation simulation games because the real world is too hard. There's a reason why Black Mirror deferred its most recent season during the pandemic and during a lot of our geopolitical issues because it was too real. And we've existed in this space of climate crisis reality since the 90s, if not earlier. And so I think that there's a lot of opportunity for us to really think about like, how do we frame a viable narrative and what do we consider fun? Because these are the situations that we've assumed for a very long time are actually like the things we should focus on to get sales. And so it's important for us to think about that.
Absolutely. Anyone, anything else to add? But wonderful point.
Maybe-
Yes, Tim, go right ahead.
Maybe for me, sustainability, it's not a sport. It's not about let's push as much sustainable topics in a story as possible, because then it becomes a joke. It's about, is it meaningful for my story and my project, then do it. But also be aware that you spend a lot of resources, time, money, and CO2. So just make a great story and make a great project. If sustainability fits in, do it, but make the best of it.
So the question of, I guess, token sustainability. So use sustainability, but make it meaningful. All right.
If
Yeah, none of us want to do something that doesn't matter to us.
Absolutely. Xalavier, go right ahead.
Oh yeah, I was just Paula's exact point. It's the same thing of even you could say token diversity in a story. There's times I see a black character in a game and I'm like, I wish you weren't here. I wish you weren't here. It would be better if you weren't here. And when an environmental message hits the same way in a story, it can similarly have a bad effect. So our job is to tell great stories and have great gameplay experiences. Where sustainability fits in, let's put it in. But like in general, thinking about more intentional experiences and value propositions and judgments we can provide a player, the better their experience is going to be. So let's make that a part of the design process too.
All right. Wonderful. On to the next question. I see the next question from Zenzo Fine. They ask, will more digital games be better for the environment? And how would that affect the physical market? So I presume the in-person stores if digital games become the industry standard.
So I'm interested in if, Tim, you have context about this in terms of physical distribution in film, or Paula, your experience in cloud. But this is actually a question that's been on my mind a bunch as well. Like, we're transitioning away from plastics and from a lot of physical media in general. It's more of a specialty thing or whatever the case may be. From what I understand, though, like streaming something, especially in the highest definition possible from Netflix, the amount of energy that consumes, especially depending on your grid, is significant. When we apply this to games and to the higher download sizes and the frequent updates, is that indeed worse for the environment than just frickin' printing a disc?
I don't know for a game, but I once was told that once you listen to a song on Spotify more than 15 times or something like that, it's better to buy the CD, because the plastic is still better than 17 times all the streaming up and down. And there's a great study made in France by The Shift, and it's about the impact of our digital footprint as a society. They split it up, and like biggest part, it's about as high as car driving at world scale. So it's an enormous impact. It's only increasing. And from that impact, video images is like 80%, and it's 3 big groups. It's streaming. The second biggest is porn, and the third is YouTube and co. It's about, and we should just be aware of that. Because I once made the joke about the second one, the porn, but we should, when we consume, we should try to make, as professionals, make the right decisions in selling our product in the most sustainable way. I was on a meeting last week where it was also about how DVD is decreasing in film, but before DVD was also a steady income for producers because it's laying around in shops. It's part of your budget coming in and your business model. It dries up, and so it's also shifting the way our financing of project is sustainable. So it's part of a bigger puzzle. I'm really happy I don't have to solve that puzzle.
So my next question is, because that, to be completely honest, that is a shocking answer. The Spotify streaming, I would not have expected that. Where does that leave us? So hearing the impacts of streaming and the digital power compared to printing discs, where does that leave us?
I want to give an example from a completely different sector. The light in the airport of Rotterdam is delivered by a commercial company, and the airport, they pay that commercial company. I'm not going to, let's say the company's name is Paula. They pay Paula to deliver the light in the airport. And Paula owns the fixtures and the bulbs and pays the energy bill. The airport pays Paula for the service of light. So in a way, maybe, and I'm just thinking out loud, and Paula, you work for Xbox, maybe I should pay Xbox the service of gaming, and you're the provider of the game and the hardware, and you pay my energy bill, and that way you know that you will have the cash you need. You know that you will provide me with the best, the most eco-friendly hardware ever possible, which is repairable. The longer it lasts, the more money you make. More fun I have on my game because it doesn't break down. So it's also a way about, and they call it circular economy. So maybe we should think about other ways of consuming, and maybe my streaming platform should pay my energy bill when I look. And we also, when I look at my streaming platform, I'm too stupid because it pushes me and pushes new content and makes me consume more and more and more. To teenagers, they want to see streaming all day on their personal screens. So it's also about, one way we want to sell as much as possible, and the other way we want to be as sustainable as possible. But maybe we should think about that financial story behind it. And
I was gonna say, I completely think the incentives and like the money is the biggest question, right? Like, and this goes back to like earlier statements about like, this is a lot. Like, I'm already overwhelmed just thinking about it. Like, where do we go from here? Like, it's like money and investment of our time, our resources, our talent. When we think about the way in which, and I know that there's a lot of comments in the chat about like, well, I still want to play the games that I want to make. Like, this doesn't sound fun for me. I think it's important for us to think about like the underlying systemic factors that enable us to make and play the games that we like. There doesn't have to be like a conscious pro-environmental narrative that is explicitly slapping players in front, like on their face, like every 2 seconds, every time they engage in an action in a core loop. But I think that if we consider that increasingly everybody is more mobile, increasingly more people are connected to the internet and have shorter attention spans because social media, we have to think about what we need to do to make sure we can keep having those experiences, keep having and making games that we love. And the best way to enable that in all its forms is to advocate for clean energy policies, ensure that players and developers have the options and support that they need to make decisions that make the most sense for them. Some players will always play like the first person shooter 4K 120 frames a second experience, right? But there's ways to make that more energy efficient and reduce its carbon footprint at scale. For players that, you know, want nothing to do with those experiences and want something that is, say, more story driven or more character development driven, there's ways to interject those narratives. But overall, our overall impact as an industry and our ability to keep making money like is going to be impacted by whether or not we have clean energy and we have the support to do that work and use that energy usefully. And so continuing to advocate for that, continuing to advocate for it in the places that you work so that you can keep doing what you want to do, and work with the people that are going to help bring your vision to life. Those are very big, but very concrete ways in which we can, not to make like a bad climate change pun, but like raise all boats, so that we can keep doing this.
That was supposed to be a I see. Thank you so much. I see the time. And you know, I've seen quite a few comments in the chat about the game Splatoon. I'm not sure if anyone here is familiar with the game Splatoon. Yes, I see Paula laughing. I also see Xalavier laughing, clapping. So I see the question actually several times now. What do you think about the games like Splatoon handling the climate change message?
I mean, the fact that the humans failed and we, like, in that setting, we're in a post-apocalyptic version of Earth that has been overrun by cephalopods, like, that's pretty clear to me.
So, you know, it sends a pretty clear message, is what I'm hearing.
That's my very short response.
So, yes, clear message. Good. Good for you, Splatoon. All right, Casper, if you could scroll down for me a little bit. All right. Ooh, many more questions. All right. Let's see. All right. So I see a question from Rexan Prower. Could a game be fun if we make people manage a sustainability transition? Or if we could make a game that shows a solar punk scene where sustainability has already taken hold and has a compelling narrative or fun multiplayer?
There's a game like that coming out right now. It's called Terra Nil. It's published by Devolver Digital, I believe. There's a lot of people exploring this space, showing that if you want to explore this, and if you have like with Splatoon, you can build a very compelling narrative around the fears and considerations of our modern day. We've always, as human beings, made stories around the world that we're seeing. A number of video games that were, even if they were in totally different settings, about a post 9/11 world in the early 2000s are myriad. You could say that was most of media from especially the United States. But
I see Tim has left us. I hope Tim returns. But Xalavier, until Tim returns, go right ahead. Keep on going. Tim, I hope you find your way back.
This is what happens when you bring up 9/11. So all of the American media in a post 9/11 world felt like it was about and around a post 9/11 world, and it was, whether it was sci-fi or fantasy, wherever the case may be, and in a lot of ways it was true. So we're seeing games do that now, sometimes directly, sometimes indirectly. And if anything, it's a really good potential hook. Do a different world, but like, if you are actively worried about the climate disaster, or the climate crisis, I'm not sure what's the right term for it. Whatever is the stuff that's happening right now, that is very clear and very fast in its evolution. If that's on your mind, if you make a game that is in some way inspired by that, it doesn't have to touch the topic at all, but people will feel that and they'll connect to that, and in that moment of connection, they also connect with you. So yeah, just make good games, make very personal games, in that
Make good games with
specific
good
regard.
stories.
Yeah, you'll probably land on something that is something related to something that your players are thinking about on a very daily basis. Like again, I'll just go back to Death Stranding for simple shorthand as a callback. Sure is interesting to get a game all about delivery right in the smack dab in the middle of the gig economy, right before a global pandemic, huh? What did you know, Kojima? What did you see? Who told you? We're gonna learn.
The stream got really interesting really fast. All right, so I see, unfortunately, we have time for one more question. Thank you, everyone in the chat, for sticking in here. Really appreciate it. One more question. I see many people asking, is that a sock on the microphone?
Yes, that is a old cost efficiency trick I learned from audio engineers. You can get a pop filter, but if you get a pop filter and then wrap it in a sock, especially a comfortable sock, it's really effective. It just looks ghetto as hell.
Lots of people in the chat also, yes, they also use that trick. Very interesting. All right, awesome. All right, last question. So throughout this stream, we have spoken about sustainability in quite a variety of different ways. So we've talked about the environmental impacts, the carbon footprint, diversity and inclusion, well-being, 4-day work week, for example. For a lot of our viewers right now are DIE students, and they will enter the industry in 1 year, in less than a year, 2 years, 3 years. For them, maybe it's interesting to close out the stream with pieces of advice. What are some key elements that a prospective industry member should look for in terms of a sustainable work environment? What should they be looking for when looking for a job? And also on the flip side, but also on the same side of the coin, what are some potential red flags that they should keep an eye out for? Anyone would like to start? Tim, Paula, go right ahead. I see Paula has unmuted herself.
I was gonna say there's so many red flags. I would say, like, as far as like early warning signs, like pro-environmental messaging and DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion messaging in hiring documentation and job postings, like very clear signal of what the company is trying to do. I would say be mindful of companies that say they are a company that operates like a family. Because that can sometimes create toxic dynamics and higher expectations beyond reason, really depending on the company. I would also say that if a job description is looking for people who can adapt to complex, constantly changing environments, probably says something about strategic decision making at that company. And so it's not a deal breaker, but I will say if you're looking for a company that is mindful of the load that they are asking their employees to carry, those are some very early whistles to keep in mind.
Yes, I hear we function like a family. I hear that a lot. And to be honest, if I would have heard that years ago, it would have been a positive, I think I would have taken that positively. But you see the impacts that that can have at the end of the day. So absolutely, Paula, thank you for sharing. Tim, I think I saw you unmute yourself as well. Red flags or good signs they should be looking for.
Ask where you will go on the next team building trip. Say we will take the plane to Portugal and we will golf there and have a lot of fun. You could think about, is that the type of company that I would like to work for? Because maybe you can do more impactful things than planes to enjoy yourself. So watch their website and see if anything about sustainability or the values that you think are important are visible publicly in what they speak about and in the project they have and the type of clients they work for. And if it doesn't feel right, just look for something else which is more fun.
So look at the website, definitely. And also, yeah, that's a great point, Tim. Yeah, for example, team activities. What are they? Where do you go? How do you get there? These are all things, and they seem menial. I think they seem trivial, but they're all, I think, vitally important. Xalavier, last but not least, tips, tricks, good things to look for, red flags.
Say in terms of red flags, the number one thing I look for in a studio these days is their production practices and methodology. Listen out for how much wasted work is inside the studio. When I hear that they're like, oh, find the fun, or like, we're willing to throw out, a lot of ideas to find the best one. Having been in enough game setups, again, I've worked on over 70 games in the past 7 years. It's like, okay, so what that actually translates to is someone, if not multiple someones inside the studio, potentially doing 3 months of work. And that all got thrown out because it wasn't properly planned. It wasn't properly integrated. The director let them do that effort, or asked them to do that effort only to throw it away so he could see that it wasn't the right idea. If we're talking about how projects are planned, what is their attitude, not just towards crunch, because crunch is a symptom of wider issues, right? I've been on studios where sometimes we had to pull 60-hour weeks, and it was extremely healthy because of everything else in terms of the way we were bringing our games to life. Then I've had studios where I worked 5 to 10 hours a week, and I nearly burnt out because of the conditions in which we were making our art. So, yeah, my number one red flag, my number one recommendation is just ask questions, especially if you can speak to some veteran game designers or people who make things. Just like, hey, what are things to look out for? What are ways in which work is wasted, in which people get burnt out of the medium, in which massive amounts of energy, both human and in terms of the wider planet, are used. And if you hear a lot of those things coming from even a really critically acclaimed studio, that might not be a healthy workplace. You might ship a 9 out of 10 game, and it might be the only game you release. Or the ice caps might melt while you're working on the game, and we all die. So don't do that if you can do so while still paying your bills.
All right. Thank you so much, Xalavier, Paula, and Tim. Thank you so much for your insights this evening. And, I really hope to continue this conversation beyond this evening. So thank you for joining us and at least, starting the conversation, bringing it to Twitch, to DIE, to Game for Thought. Paula, Tim, Xalavier, thank you so much. And for all of you out there on Twitch, hang in there for just one more minute. We will play you the new DIE trailer, and we will also come back with information about the next Game for Thought stream next month. Just hang tight. And once again, everyone give a huge round of applause in the chat for our lovely panelists, Paula, Tim, and Xalavier. Thank you so much. Stick right with us. We'll be right back. All right, everyone, we are back. Thank you so much for joining yet another Game for Thought live stream. Thank you to our guests for this evening, Paula, Tim, and Xalavier. Thank you to Hoest DIE, Master Chief, for making this a continued live stream series. Thank you to Quindo and the Flemish Audiovisual Fund as well. And a huge thank you to our lovely technical crew this evening and our moderators. For this evening, we have Casper. Claps in the chat for Casper. We also have Luke Peters. Thank you, Luke, for moderating the chat, keeping it nice and clean. And also Istvan. So big thanks to those right here for helping the stream go smoothly. Make sure to check us out. Next month, we will be live again on Twitch on Wednesday, the 14th of December, tackling the topic of mobile games. So any of you out there who play mobile games, you're interested maybe in the ethical implications, psychologically, philosophically relevant questions there, go ahead, join us on the 14th of December for another panel discussion. Also exciting to know, the Game for Thought podcast, which not yet have we had a new episode this season yet, but it is coming soon. If you have not listened to any of the previous episodes of the Game for Thought podcast, go to Spotify, type in Game for Thought, and give it a listen. Lots of previous episodes about very interesting topics. We have game history, psychology in games. Also, esports, for example. If you want to scratch that Game for Thought itch until the 14th of December, go ahead, visit Spotify, and listen to one of the podcasts. Thank you so much for joining. We really appreciate you being here on Twitch, and we cannot wait for the next live stream in December. And with that, have a great morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are, and we will see you next time. Bye-bye!